First of all, just thanks everyone so much for coming this morning. It's beckoning me over. The origin of this project was when I went to see the Spirit of 45 at the Warwick Arts Centre on the day when the live Q&A took place afterwards. And I was really inspired by the film, as I'm sure everyone here, almost by definition for being here, would have been. And it struck me at the end of the film, when there was the call for a generation of people who remember at least the legacy of 1945 to open up a dialogue with the younger generation. And you know, personally, I consider myself quite politically informed and historically informed, but it's only when I saw the Spirit of 45 that it really kind of struck home to me the scale of that achievement in 1945, post-war, the inception of the welfare state, the birth of the NHS, and the things that probably I take for granted and you know, people younger than me might take for granted. So I'd like to start off by showing the end of the Spirit of 45 and then kind of offering a link from that into our project.
A caring capitalism, Miliband is talking about this socially responsible capitalism. It's a bit like the Arabian Phoenix, isn't it? Everyone's heard about it, nobody's ever seen one.
We have to face up to the fact that, again, it's the market, it's the system that says that profit is the most important thing that makes the world go round, that we have to take on.
It's a hard struggle, but this system, what we live under, is absolutely rotten and corrupt as far as I'm concerned, from top to bottom. It's rotten. And the quicker it goes, the better.
In the face of the failure of the right, if you like, the neoliberals and their assault on the public services, their failure, terrible financial global failure at the moment of the market, we still are trying to make the case that actually we should go back to working together for the greater good. And I think that the NHS has been a terrific example of that, as have many things in this country, education and the welfare state. And what's so shocking is the people who are dismantling this at the moment are the people who grew up and benefited from that system.
The idea of socialism is weak in this country, and the idea of capitalism is very strong. Capitalism itself is not strong, it's falling apart. But the idea of capitalism is very strong.
The paradox in the situation is that the ideas which come together and which have traditionally been called socialism exist in a sort of atomized way right across the political spectrum. When you see the Occupy people occupy against, say that they're anti-capitalist, anti-free market, the corollary of that is that you're in favour of some kind of planning, even if that's not an articulated view. They want some kind of democratic control over the economy. That is the essence of the socialist idea, whether or not you choose to call it socialist, and whatever colour you paint it.
I think we were hijacked. The working class organisations were hijacked by the middle class, basically. That's my opinion. Like, especially the Labour Party. You know, Labour Party was, was a working class organisation at one time, and in no way, shape, or form can you call the Labour Party a working class organisation anymore. Because the working class haven't got any big organisations that can take the establishment on.
They don't realise that strength they've got, do they? They don't realise that power they've got. The working class can change the whole history as quick as that. They just don't realise that they haven't grasped it.
One day, I think the dream that those miners had underground before the war will become a reality, and we will be able to take real control of our own lives, and we will have manufacturing industry. And the day when you see our kids walk in the streets of Caerphilly and walk in the streets of Abercynon, 18 years of age, and they've got their GSEs and they've got their hands in their pockets and their head are down, and they seem as if they got no future and their eyes in hell. I think those days will one day come to an end, coming out of the dream that those miners had so many years ago.
I'm absolutely convinced that the older generation, rather than being a burden on society, has got an absolute duty to come forward and join with young people and talk to them and explain. I say to pensioners, turn off the television, take their plugs out of their ears and start talking about what was the vision in 1945. What did we want? How did we see it progressing? What did it mean from the cradle to the grave? What did it mean to common ownership and for sharing and communities? What does it mean? And start to rebuild that understanding of what sort of life we want. I think we've got a real chance to do that.
Okay, so I work at the Centre for Excellence in Media Practice at Bournemouth, and also work with the Media Education Association. And quite a lot of the projects that we do involve young people using film and other media for kind of self-representation and engagement in various kinds of practices. And it occurred to me that there was an opportunity, as Dot says in the film, for some intergenerational work, which might be at least a starting point for the kind of conversation that the film so passionately kind of calls for us to have. So with the support of the Media Education Association, 16 films, Film Education and the English and Media Centre and the BFI, we were able to send a call out through social media for young people to make 3 to 5 minute short films responding to many of the key issues emerging from the spirit of 1945. So we're going to show you those 5 of the films that we've chosen for today that all address those issues in different ways now. And then we've got a panel discussion and an open forum. And what I hope will happen, what we hope will happen, is that this conversation that's so urgently needed will begin today.
The welfare system was created in the 1940s, and it really took off just after the war. The first real document of this was the Beveridge Report, which was outlining all the faults of the welfare state and how this could be changed. The British public took to this in leaps and bounds, and they liked the idea of the NHS. This is now one of the biggest organisations within the UK.
So that was the welfare system. We are going to now focus more on education, how it is now, into how it was in its earliest years. We're going to focus mainly on the changes in resources, discipline, opportunities in education and career paths. We interviewed a few individuals to see what their paths were through education.
Through the course of education, resources have changed dramatically, with new technology coming out, from blackboards to smartboards.
Right, well that's simple enough. There was no such thing as a computer. And yes, books and a blackboard.
Computers, obviously, since we do IT courses in school and college. But I was generally given the opportunity for a helper, but I declined it because I really didn't want someone to help me. I wanted to have the same equal chance as everyone else.
Because of the changes in the law and human rights, discipline in schools has become a hot topic and has been forced to change. This in many cases has affected how students behave in schools.
A typical example, we had school dinners, which I didn't go to often, but for some reason I were on school dinners. And we were doing what kids always do, and I was tipping salt into my colleagues, my friends' water glass, and I got caught, and I ended up on the stage in the morning in front of the whole school receiving the slipper on my backside.
I wasn't really disciplined, I didn't really get detentions and stuff like that.
Trips have always been viewed as a good idea due to their physical learning experience for the students.
I knew I could never go. I never took much notice, but a pal of mine went, a lad I used to mate around with, and it seemed to be fairly informal.
So I was given the opportunity. I went on 2 art trips.
Students living now live in a very different world from students 50 years ago. Now we've got better technology, better ways of teaching and different styles of teaching. And the way students interact with their teachers shows how far education has come.
If you mean in the actual education, I don't think it's as good as it used to be.
I do believe that it is better than back then, obviously with computers and high-tech systems now.
Today there are many different paths after mandatory education you can take, such as universities, colleges and apprenticeships. However, 60 years ago, the main path people took was straight out of school and straight into a job.
Your career prospects or your job opportunities, they were endless. I had my job as an apprentice engineer 2 years before I left school.
It was a case of going to either the sixth form, to the local colleges, or to go straight into a job or an apprenticeship.
Education can become a bit expensive today, but in today's world and education, there are certain benefits that can help students with the costs.
There's the cost of getting higher, the availability of help is getting smaller and a lot harder to get, a lot harder to find.
I have no knowledge at all of there being any costs.
60 years ago, the majority of people left schools between the ages of 14 and 16. However, nowadays, students are required to stay in some form of education until they are at least 18 years old.
I went straight into work. I actually left 4 days before the end of term because I had a job to go to.
The jobs, it's like going to the supermarket and picking up a loaf of bread. You have a choice of loads of loaves of bread. Well, your choice of jobs, the jobs were just, even in Murfield, there were factories, there were mills, there were builders, there was just lots and lots and lots of work.
We believe education has come a long way since the start of the welfare system, as it has gone through multiple changes of technology, discipline, teaching methods and student interaction. We also believe it can go even further, as technology is still changing the way we live.
Some of the people in our video suffer from disabilities or learning disorders. Our presenter Andrew suffers from dyslexia and our other presenter Stephen suffers from a visual impairment. This includes aniridia, cataracts and nystagmus. One of our interviewees also has a disability called Asperger's syndrome.
Nothing if together we don't stand. There is power in a union.
In 2013, they're really to try to make sure that people who are lucky enough to be in work have got somebody to represent them should something not go quite according to plan, so people aren't entirely on their own.
They mean that everyone gets together and they help the future of our country.
I think without trade unions, a lot of these organisations are going to be quite divided without any kind of strength. I think that's what the trade unions will
need a voice for the actual workers.
In 2013, trade unions are to protect the rights of workers who they represent, and to ensure that they are not discriminated against, and to make sure that their rights are within the workplace. There is somebody to look after them and to make sure that they are treated fairly.
They're for the collective workers to have to get their rights and fair pay against the employers. It's only by sticking together in a big group it gives them protection and the strength to fight for their rights.
Protection at work, obviously the hard-won freedoms that have been got in the past, you know, the right to holiday pay, to basic health and safety, which are now being taken away. And, you know, without trade unions, we're not going to be able to stop them doing it.
Well, I think they mean a lot to me because it will help people with jobs who don't get treated right by their employers and stuff.
extremely important, because standing alone, you can't get anywhere. Collectively, you can fight for your rights.
Yes, I did belong to a trade union. I belonged to the electrical trade union, which made sure that us apprentices, when we were apprentices, completed the work necessary to make us fully skilled.
They're not really as successful as they were when they first started.
There's about, I'd say about 20 NUT members and other various unions as well in the school. We meet regularly and we have called strikes in the past, and I suspect we'll be doing so in the fairly near future as well.
Trade unions are active when they need to be. So if there are issues, I consult the trade unions about what direction we should actually go in. And so in that respect, they are very active and very useful.
Without them, you don't have any jurisdiction about how you're going to work, what is necessary for your work, the protection of your work, and also the rate at which you work, the salaries.
But I'm not sure that people realise to this nowadays just how important they actually are.
People have jobs, security. It's not growth that we need, it's that job security. You know, I don't have to tell you, I tell other audiences because they need telling, but I don't need to tell you the way the graph goes. The graph of union membership, as it goes up, the amount of money that the richest in society have goes down. And as soon as that peaked in 1979 and union membership began to dip, the richest 1% began to make more and more money. People are beginning to understand that no tinkering about with the economy, no tax breaks or encouragement here is going to actually get our society going. The only thing that's going to do that is a proper day's wage for a proper day's work. And that's what this festival is all about. That's what the Toll Puddle Martyrs are about. That's what our movement is all about. There is power in a union.
Always in the name of greatness, a greatness that's insatiable. Retreating back down the Thames to the heart of darkness, overwhelmed by the starkness of these rainy British days, by the steel and the glassiness of Canary Wharf, the capital of capital, where Thatcher began it all, where trickle down turned into look around and see instead the gated communities, the tales of two cities, where we forge broken ties out of speculation so that debt becomes the word that defines our nation. We've all taken part in a mass creation of a desperate, hungry credit generation where we borrow from the funds of our children's education. But the debt lies deeper. A debt that seeps out of something called national pride. We turn our backs on now and look to 1945, to our finest hour, to that sweet nostalgia, where we knew how important it was to have something to be proud of. And so you swallow the doublethink and remain suspended between past and present and time unended. But a prophecy is a prophecy, and a prophecy by its nature is fulfilled, and we can avoid another riot if what we're trying to build are real ties between each other and with the present, rather than looking back in time into other classes with resentment. Is this the land of heritage and history? Because it seems to me that this legacy is lost in a matrix of CCTV, because those Olympic rings are circling more than a stadium. They circle our skin and we stand in the shade of them, still told to keep calm and carry on as if someone's invading them. But I was told that the walls came down the year I was born, so why am I kept back by wire stretching 12 feet tall? A patchwork pattern stretches out in zones below, an assault course of grey punctured with danger of death by electric shock yellow. And I recognise that effect, don't you? Or let's just call it the Enclosure Act Mark II. Where the common land is privatised and the territories are marked under threatening skies. The fences glimmer in the shadow of high-rise and the reflection shines back in our eyes as we retreat inside ourselves, as we learn to despise the strangers who press in on every side. Can't you see we're atomised? And all roads lead eventually, not to Rome but inevitably to the Westfield Stratford retail city. This globe of commerce, oh what a thing of beauty, to bypass completely the local community. You don't see the crumbling precinct. You can turn your eyes from poverty because here, old is old news and we specialise in novelty. And I've been there. It's so bright it hurts me. In its violent attempts to pull me into ecstasy, I can feel it pulsing from the people next to me, feel it spread, trying to alter my identity. But if you look at ecstasy, etymologically, it's about being beside yourself, outside yourself, to be for a moment someone other than yourself. And isn't that what's needed to create a legacy? To feel a sense of responsibility? To sympathise and empathise and criticise and recognise a place where we want to spend our lives.
With pit closures and everyone losing their jobs. And she tells me even now about the stories of people who had lost their jobs coming around knocking doors to collect tins because they couldn't afford any food because they had lost their jobs.
One of my nans had a little brother when she was little, and he fell down the stairs, and her mum couldn't afford to take him to the doctors to get him checked out, and he died.
Full-time unemployment is really disappointing in the South Wales valleys where I'm from. People tend to either be jobless or they have a part-time job, and often people complain about not being able to make things meet.
So I grew up in a town called Oldham, which used to thrive on industry of the cotton mill, the cotton trade from Manchester, and there used to be quite a few mills that were in there. And then obviously when the cotton industry died out, the mills slowly started declining and started being pulled down, but the jobs were never replaced. So as such now there is a high unemployment, but there's also a high poverty. There's a high amount of poverty in the town because it's never been a town that's had much money.
Everyone was getting made redundant, like a couple of people in my family got made redundant and stuff. And it affects the area because there's a lot of people who are on the dole and having to move to council estates and stuff like that. They can't afford things, and I think it affects their children as well, because if your parents are on the dole, then you get a certain stigma attached to it.
I think that we have become a selfish generation because the way the economic climate has gone over the recent years has made people have the attitude of it's the survival of the fittest, and they've forgotten about those legacies that actually brought us together, during World War II and the 80s. And I think that tends to be amongst the young generation especially.
If people can get more than you by stepping on you a little bit, then they will. A lot of people will. There's not so much this sense of people helping other people out and then being content with having the same as them. They do always want more. I don't think there's anyone that really represents working class values or anything, because they are there's certain politicians that come from similar backgrounds to us, like Andy Burnham.
There's one particular MP called Dennis Skinner, who's been there since the late 70s. He's never missed a sit-in because he's always said that why should he miss a sit-in when he's there to represent the people. No matter what his values are, he's stuck in a party where he'd have to go up against so many other people that don't have the same values, that aren't from our background. And there is, on the political spectrum, they are pretty much right in the middle. And the NHS budget has been cut. An example being Bronga's hospitals, A&E department, the budget for that being slashed. My local A&E down in South Wales, that's being completely closed by the Welsh Assembly government. So I don't think there's a very bright future for the NHS in Wales.
I have faith in the NHS if it's let to stay how it is and helped out a bit, because the things I've heard about what's going on now, it's not faith in the NHS, it's losing faith in the government's ability or the government's willingness to let us keep the NHS.
So I want to see for my future, I want to see a lot more people my age being homeowners, getting stable jobs, and just being successful in their life. Success is their aspirations, wherever their aspirations are and wherever their ambitions are. If they can fulfill them, then that's the kind of generation that I want to see.
I want to see a lot more fairness in the country, whereas people who need help get help.
Huddersfield is a fantastic city, town actually I should say, biggest town in Europe apparently, and it's always been known as Handsome Huddersfield. So when I sign letters that I take, that I post out to friends or colleagues or businesses, I always sign it Vic Watson, the Handsome Huddersfield Town Crier. I've been town crier in Huddersfield for 17 years and I think it's one of the best things that I've ever done in my life. I love it. It's just lovely to talk to the general public. It has changed over the years that I've been here. Originally, there was no Kingsgate Centre, for instance. There was Venn Street and there was a church on Venn Street that doubled up as the theatre. Things change, and you will hear a lot of old people saying, or older people I should say, how things have changed for the worst. And to an extent they have, I think. You could go out and you could leave your door open and nobody would bother, nobody would come in. And if they did, the neighbours would always look and do something about it if there was somebody untoward.
I feel part of a community. I'm a Fartown lad and I've always gone back to Fartown wherever I am and wherever I've been. I love coming back to Fartown. But I'm also part of a global community. I have this view that I'm a humanitarian. I try to be a humanitarian where I see everyone as my brother or my sister. And any community I walk in is my community just as much as anyone else's.
The community is now multicultural, especially in Huddersfield. And I've got friends in all sorts of different cultures.
The word community is like, there's so many different types of communities nowadays. It's more to do with like what music you listen to or what you wear or your sexuality. So it's not like, I guess how it used to be with like the people living on your road were part of your community or in your town. But now I think there's more communities based on different things. So I think it's changed like beyond recognition, I guess you could say.
I'm a 60s youth. 1961 I was born, and in my community there was a lot of racism. Nigger, wog, coon, sambo, regular. My mum and dad were subjected to various racist language. We were placed in socio-economic deprived areas, the migrant community. So in those communities we called home. So we made the best of a bad situation. So I believe the position we were put in terms of the 60s and the 70s, it kind of forced us or demanded us to have a much more cohesive community and look after each other.
I'm more concerned that the younger generation are the generation that are going to be looking after my generation when we're old and we can't do anything. And I think when it gets to that point, our economy, everything's just going to crash because they don't know anything other than partying, spending money, buying new clothes, taking drugs, drinking alcohol. And I'm not generalising everyone because obviously, like me, there are people who saw the choice, but yeah, the younger generation is definitely lost.
In a way, I feel sorry for young people, and we have a few young people in this room that you can't see. And I am glad I'm the age I am. I wouldn't want to have to go through what these young people will go through when they get older, when I'm no longer here. That would be being morbid now.
Thank you very much to all of the filmmakers who've submitted films and given us lots to think about, and there's some really impressive work there. And we have our panel here, Dot, who was in Ken's film originally, and Tony. Jonathon. Jonathan's been subject to some of the worst sort of errors and, you know, transcription errors. In the original programme, he was down as a senior citizen, and given that he's a young and vital man, this was a terrible error, so apologies.
Not so terrible.
Well, it could be a great compliment.
Those videos suggest it's better that way.
And Dorothy's one of the filmmakers, and of course Ken Loach. So thank you very much to all of you for agreeing to participate. I would really like to start by hearing from the filmmakers themselves to make sure that we understand a bit about what went into those films. So I propose to ask the teams and the individuals who made those films initially to say a bit about their work, and then invite some panel members to contribute, and then throw it open to the floor. We are filming this for this is an initiative that Julian launched, and it's part of the Centre for Excellence in Media Practice at Bournemouth University. So we're filming this. This is why you've all been asked to sign release forms, so that the video can end up on our website. So I have to remember to let the roving microphone get to you when we come to the floor, so that we don't miss your questions and your comments. So apologies if I forget to do that and then interrupt myself by doing it. Okay. So should we come to the filmmakers first? And Dorothy, we've got on the panel, and Nikki, who's the poet in the audience. If we come to you first, because you explicitly mentioned Ken's film. You mentioned the Spirit of 45. You talked about 45 as being our greatest moment. Would you like to say a bit about what went into your film and what you were trying to say through it? And
Should we wait for a mic to get to you, and I'll begin?
Can we get a mic to Nikki?
So I've been working on, I suppose, politically, socially engaged documentaries. We're both students at Warwick University, and Nikki was writing these fantastic poems, which, as in the name of greatness does, condenses perhaps all of the current social problems facing particularly our generation in 3 minutes, although that was quite a heavy editing job. And in fact, I think at least in our student community, we're all talking about these things. All of my friends, that's kind of, it's quite standard politics. We're aware of what's going on, and particularly with regards to university privatisation and the rising fees and stuff. And it just, making that documentary came from a kind of really basic need to voice it, and it's quite kind of concentrated on London in that one, but it's a national problem, and I think as specific to Britain, all of, particularly your poem is, I think it's actually something that is happening all across Europe. And I mean, look at fees in America, they don't even have an NHS. It's kind of just these key themes affecting most societies, I think, condensed in 3 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, we actually mentioned looking back to 1945, and it was actually sort of double-edged. On the one hand, I think it was we wanted to mention 1945 because that was the sense of community that we want to kind of encourage amongst young people our age. But also maybe a slight criticism of the fact that we are constantly looking back. Obviously, that when this was being filmed, it was like Olympic mania, and everywhere was this nostalgia for kind of wartime Britain and for everything that encompassed. And I just got really sick of nostalgia and always looking back and everything covered in slogans that were kind of mimicking wartime slogans and the Union Jack everywhere, and it was just like, can we stop trying to recreate the slogans from 1945 and start thinking about what the slogans of 2013 are and where we're going forwards instead of looking back all the time. So it was kind of looking to 45 for inspiration, but thinking maybe we can move on from it as well.
Is it a hopeful film, do you think?
Yes, yeah, so that doesn't really come across like that. But that's why at the end, it's coming out of that Olympic hype. I really felt like there was this ecstasy going on that summer. Everyone was just Britain mad. But thinking about, literally going back to the roots of things, thinking about what something like ecstasy even means, and it means literally being outside of yourself. And being outside of yourself means not just looking inwards and being solipsistic and thinking about the individual, but actually looking out and looking to help others and join forces with other people.
Yeah, I think also as negative as it may feel to kind of just reel off all of these, problems, whatever you want to call them, with Britain, it's quite important that you do just identify, for example, Thatcher's impact on today, because perhaps a lot of our generation don't even really know what it was to have unions, or to have job security, or to have solid healthcare and state education. So I think you actually need to just list these things in order for that to then become a productive process, to have some idea of what we are going to move on to. But inevitably,
Ray Day
it's,
yeah.
Okay, well, you've given me a lovely segue there with the mention of unions, because Lydia, your film was very explicitly about unions and collectivisation, wasn't it? Do you want to tell us a little bit about what went into the thinking behind your film?
Well, I've kind of grown up around unions because most years of my life have been to Topwell Festival, which is about the importance of unions and martyrs and stuff. So I thought that was the best thing to make my film about. Obviously most people there knew about unions, but I was surprised when I asked a lot of my friends at school and they had no idea what union was. And even some people at Torpedo had said that they were surprised that they were there because their mums had made them go and stuff and they didn't know what one was.
So did you have a personal sense that this is something that is being lost or that isn't as important anymore and needs to be?
Yeah, when I started talking to my friends at school about the fact that I was making it, I felt like it was being forgotten because I assumed that everyone knew about unions and they knew how important it was, but people seemed to just not care as much.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the education film. So it's Natalie and Levan, isn't it, at the front here? You could tell us a bit, because education wasn't mentioned in, it wasn't a big strand in Spirit of 45, but you chose to...
was the terrace route one.
Of course.
The
lousy chair. Right. Let's come. Terrace Road. That was interesting. You started by looking at unemployment, which obviously relates nicely to unions. Perhaps you could expand on that a little bit.
I really came from under one roof. It was like my housemates, and under one roof we've got 2 people from Liverpool, 2 people from Oldham, and then someone from the Welsh Valleys. And I thought it'd be a nice. It was just industrial areas, and it was kind of interesting that we were all under one roof and had stuff to say. But whereas where you've said about like together when you speak, people are saying the same thing as what you're thinking. I haven't found that within my university environment. It's more like left and socialism is more like a thing to look bad upon. So that's where that came from, like kind of trying to wean out the ideas of left kind of ideas from the people I was living with, I felt comfortable with.
Your household then is a very left-conscious household, isn't it?
Yeah, but
is that unusual?
Where we're living at the minute, I think it is. When you kind of bring it up with people around us, people either go silent or don't agree. Which I felt like I am from Liverpool, and around me at home, everyone thinks the same. So being within a university environment and finding that people aren't like thinking towards the left is strange, I felt. So that was like where the film, that's why I wanted to do it.
Do you want to add anything to that, Levan? How's that?
It's about, well, because I live in a different house, and in my house, one of my housemates literally has no opinion or like no knowledge on anything towards that. And then another housemate's like, if you mention it towards him, he'll be talking about it for hours. So it's kind of like different controversy, and like how, like it does amaze me how some people can have literally no knowledge about it, and then others are so like passionate about it. So it's kind of like that, really.
Yeah. Have you got any theories of yourself why that might be?
Like Natalie said, like where people come from, I think it's towards like, because he's down south in Bristol, and I think for him it's like, because he lives in a small village, it's like more towards that, and then she's from Swansea, and I think it's just, I don't know if it's like, I wouldn't say ignorance, but more like, just like, it's never been a thing for her to think about, so I guess that could be it. I'm not
Okay. So moving on to the first film we saw was about education, and have we got Emma and Andrew?
Yeah, I'm here. Andrew's over that one.
Okay. Could you tell us a bit about your film? You focused on my
Well,
intro to the last bit, and
we're
it's now
all-
appropriate.
yeah.
You focused on education, which wasn't inspiriting. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Well, we're all college students, so we're seeing education all around us, and we're all looking at universities at the moment. And it's just like some people I know have got bursaries, and there's different grants that you can get, and it's all like a lot of it in a way is about money and the support that we can get. Because I know when my dad went to uni, he didn't have to pay anything for it. The government paid for it all. So it's a bit unfair, even though there's all these loans that you can pay back, it's a bit stressful for us all to think about, and just focusing a bit on that and how education has come a long way and changed so much. And I know a lot of people say how my generation doesn't really have a really good education. We don't know a lot of things like general knowledge or like geography. People don't know where different places are and things like that.
Okay. So, do you see that as something that obviously you think has changed between generations? Where do you think that might change next? Where do you think that might go next?
I'm not too sure. I just think it should be looked at really, because I don't think education's really getting better, because a lot of people take it for granted because it's like at high school, that sort of stage, it's all free, so people take it for granted and don't really take it seriously, so they don't get the proper education. Like where quite a few years ago, when education was just becoming free, people were so happy to have it and concentrated so well on it.
Okay. Does your co-filmmaker want to add anything, Andrew?
Andrew, Stephen.
Actually, yeah, just give it a second. Thank you.
I found it really interesting how far it had actually come, education, and how much it had changed in teaching methods and all this. And for me, it was I really wanted to educate other people on how it's changed, you know, because not a lot of people in my generation know, and I'd like to think that the film will get seen by enough people that they'll find out and realise that it's changed a lot and come so far, and to say where you think it's going to go, because Emma said a lot of the points about why we made it. So to answer your question as where we think it'll change next, I think it's hopefully going to go towards better teaching methods, because even though it's all part of, it all reports back to the same top man, there's a lot of different schools and certain teaching methods are still not necessarily getting through to the amount of individuals we have in education now, because our culture is growing, you know, with all the different people and races and religions and stuff like this. I think we need more individuality, you know, with teaching. The methods are all just too generalised, and certain students I know struggle in certain lessons because just of the way they're taught. So I'd like to think it'll change more the way we're taught now as opposed to what we're taught. But we do need, particularly with geography, like she said, there's a lot of countries we don't even know about, and widen the horizons, and history as well. It's a very focused point to history. There's only certain things we learn about. I mean, a lot about obviously the world wars and stuff like that, you know. So just generalise it more, I think. Okay. Stephen was in our group as well, and that's where the part of how disability, and that's why we wanted to bring that into it too, to show that's again like the differences with people. They need to get some schools need to make more effort for teaching different kind of people like that, but he'd be able to tell you more about that, because obviously he's been through more of that, so it's just on the end there.
Stephen, do you want to come in?
Yeah, like Andrew said, that obviously I've visual impairment, which Emma mentioned at the end of our film, and basically I don't think schools, they try their best to cater to different disabilities, but not all schools get it right, and it depends on, it's that balance between independence and support, and I think some schools go too much towards independence, and then some schools go too much the other way for more support. But I definitely think disability has moved on a lot, and it's got a lot better because obviously more people are aware about different disabilities and how it affects people in different ways. I definitely think that's one of the biggest improvements in the education sector. It's more equal now. Everybody can take part in whatever lesson it is, and there's ways and means around subjects for all different people.
Okay, thank you. So that's a nice, quite a complex picture of education. In some ways, it's very inclusive. On the other hand, it's very prescriptive, and there are certain omissions that you've pointed out. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those issues. Okay, so finally, let's come to the group that made the film, just called Spirit of 13. And I just went round earlier, and I've forgotten many of your names. Apologies, but can we start with Rory or? And you're going to have to nominate yourselves to talk, I'm afraid, because I don't know you all. But can we start with Rory, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your Huddersfield film and what you were trying to say with that.
Yeah, I mean, coming from a personal point of view, I grew up in a very close-knit community. It was just 2 terraced houses opposite each other. We had a piece of land in the middle, and that was it. And I lived there for sort of the first 12 years of my life. And when I moved sort of closer to the centre of Huddersfield, I was getting more independent. I was going around Huddersfield on my own a lot more. I found out that I didn't really know that much about a community outside of what I'd known. I just assumed pretty much everybody lived that way. And it turned out it wasn't true, and I just thought it was really interesting to explore sort of how different sectors of Huddersfield react differently with each other. You know.
Okay, so what was you called your film Spirit of 13. What do you think the Spirit of 13 is then?
It's a big question.
You can hand that over to a team member.
Yeah, with Poppy. She'll answer. Poppy?
I think that's kind of the point of the film, is to kind of enforce the fact that we're lacking in a lot of spirit. I mean, the community has changed a lot, and it's really sad that you can't go out and leave your door open, and you can't let your kids go out and play on the streets because you're worried about them. We don't have that sense of trust and stability in where we live, and it's not right, and we just really wanted to enforce that. And
did you get a really strong sense that was real once upon a time, that people really were in and out of each other's houses? And
everyone we interviewed said that they don't talk to people who they live next door to, or anyone on the street or anything like that, and it's shocking, really.
Okay, so yours is a much more pessimistic portrait than
Pretty much, yeah.
13.
Yeah.
Okay. Would anyone else from your production team like to comment before we move to the panel?
I'd like to.
Yeah, great.
With film, I think that we're kind of comparing the Spirit of 1945 to the Spirit of 13 in the sense of a community, because Paul was saying, nowadays you can't leave your doors open, and in 1945, because it was just after the war, the community was absolutely thriving. Everybody knew the neighbour, everyone knew the whole street, just everybody knew each other. And nowadays you just don't get that at all. You're lucky if some people even feel a little bit risky if they give a house key to the neighbour to look after. Whereas before they didn't have to have the key because they could have just left the back door unlocked. So we're just I think what we're wanting to get across is that we want to go back to that, and that we want to feel the spirit again, which has been lost over the years, and hopefully it'll get thriving again.
Thank you. So on that, I'm going to come to Dot first, because your comment at the end of Ken's film was really a call to action, wasn't it? It was a call to action for intergenerational dialogue, and I think there's been lots of evidence of that happening through this filmmaking process. Has anything struck you about it?
Yeah, I mean, my position is that the older generation have a huge responsibility. We started out with 1945. I mean, I was 10 at the end of the war, so this young man who was 12 when he lived his first years in that sort of community, I was 10 at the end of the war. And the thing is that in between that period when there was a change and growth and the building of trade unions, after all, at the beginning of the miners' strike, there were 14.5 million people in the trade unions in this country. Today there are only 6.5 million in the trade unions, and a lot of people don't know about trade unions. It was interesting that we had a film about trade unions, And I think that one of the things that we've lost is that kind of history. I was at a funeral on Tuesday of a 90-year-old called Murray Foley, who'd been a docker, but his two grandmothers were in the 1888 Bryant and May's strike, women's strike, which was a very important development for that family, and they never forgot it. And his grandfather was in the 1889 dockers dispute strike, which meant that dockers won huge gains in their lives. So I don't suppose, you know, there are many in this room of your sort of the young age that really ever get taught about these things, because they don't have that in the curriculum. I think the discussion about how you're taught, I think you ought to start thinking about what you're taught, because there are certain things that are completely missing. And I don't want to go on because I know we want to discover. There's another man I want to remember here, and his name was Peter Lenihan. He died sadly early of cancer, but he led the marches in the late 70s against youth unemployment in those days. There was a big wave of youth unemployment. And one of the things that he said was he thought that the unions should have family membership, so that they take responsibility for developing their own history, and that is the history of the working class and how it became a class for itself, struggling for its own its own future. And my last point, because is that I think you ought to look at the trade union that is making quite a lot of changes, which is Unite the Union, which has now started to have community branches of the union. You see, one of the points made in the film was the trade unions are to represent people at work. They also have to consider, and in a sense they always have, because the conditions we have came through the development of the trade unions. The National Health Service and so on arose because of their struggle in the main. But today, with a lot of youth unemployment and a lot of people organising in campaigns, it seems to me that that development of bringing those people together in community branches of the trade union is stepping beyond what trade unions are in law and stepping outside and saying we have a responsibility for building the community, building an understanding and developing for the future. And I'm in the National Union of Journalists, but I've also joined a community branch of the Unite the Union, because I think there I'm going to meet not just people in a trade, but people across the communities who can struggle together for what should be the kind of struggle that took place in 1945.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask Ken, what your thoughts are on both, well, either or both, the content of the films that you've seen, these young people have made, or the way in which they've responded to some of the provocations in your film.
First of all, well done to everybody who's made a film, because it takes bottle to put yourself on the screen, and well done. Well done for that go. Secondly, the idea of the spirit of an age is the dominant ideas of that age. What are the dominant ideas? What are the ideas that you accept without thinking about it? What do you absorb from that age? And we made the film about 1945 precisely because those ideas have slipped away. And the ideas were that we were stronger as a community than as an individual, that we could solve problems together. The idea of the public good was the dominant idea, that we contributed together to make the world a better place, to make the country a better place, to make your town or workplace or whatever a better place. That was the dominant idea. What's the spirit of the age now? Well, as we tried to suggest in our little film, the spirit changed in '79 when the ruling party said there is no such thing as society, and that what was dominant then and has become unthinkingly accepted now by most people is that individual pursuit of individual interest will lead to a greater good for everybody. And that's the prevailing idea now, that individual interest, in fact, the mayor of our great city, this city, put it himself in his usual P.G. Wodehouse joking way, but by God he meant it, greed is good. That's the spirit of the age, as enunciated by the mayor. And as I say, he has this kind of idiot jokey manner, but he means it. And the spirit of the age is greed is good. And that's the challenge you've got. And I think in some of the films we really saw that. I think in your poem was terrific, really. I mean, really said it. And in all the others, in some way, in some place. And I think you've got a huge problem, really. You've got a huge problem because you're much bigger than my generation had, and I was only 9 in 1945.
Oh, well, you're only young.
I'm only young. You've got a huge problem because, I mean, the biggest problem is the world's collapsing, as we know. I mean, there won't be a world for generation after generation after generation. The resources are being eaten up. You're faced with no job security. Most people are faced with, I mean, we used to say, get a trade and it'll last you a life. That's not the case now, as we all know. And so the question is, how do you make a film about the spirit of this age, the power of the big corporations, and make it and have some optimism? And the only way you can find the optimism is to find the mechanism for change. Because if you can't change it, you can't be optimistic. And the mechanism for change, I would suggest, is back in what happened in 45, which was that people worked together and organised together. And that means, as Dot is saying, organising in trade unions. It means organising in your community. It means organising in your college and university. It means organising through your age group or whatever, but organising collectively. Because the only thing that can challenge the power of the individual is the power of the collective. And the power of the collective, you can do anything. But by God, you've got to organise. And you've got to recognise, first of all, that the spirit of this age is unacceptable. And where it comes from, and its economic power, and its economic imperatives, that's where it comes from. And the only way you can change it is to work together.
Jonathan, you were in the film, and you've seen these films today. Is there anything about what Ken has just said that you would like to endorse or develop?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a GP. So I'm a doctor in London, and there was a survey of people who worked in the NHS done a year or two ago, and they found that there were very few things that they all agreed on. But one of those things was that the NHS was fair. So whoever gets sick gets the care that they need, and with 9% of the GDP in this country going towards healthcare, whatever you do for your job, no matter how demoralising or how hard the work, you can be satisfied that every 11th hour the money that's earned from that goes towards looking after somebody who needs it. An old person with dementia, somebody who's got cancer, somebody who's sick. And that sense of solidarity, that sense that we're all going to look after each other when we get sick is so powerful, and it's why the NHS is so revered and so loved, that social contract. So even though it may be a small idea, as Julian Tudor Hart, the guy in the beard at the end of the Spirit of 45 said, the idea of capitalism is very strong and the idea of socialism is weak. Within the NHS, that idea that we will take care of each other is still very, very strong, and people kind of forget that. And that's something which I think you can then extend to say, well, not only will we take care of each other when we're sick, but we will take care of each other when we're suffering, when we're out of work, when we need food, when we need housing, and so on and so on. And there's something in that that's very recently been shown to be alive that I think is still there, and that's a small flame that we could do well to encourage.
Okay. A bit of optimism.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Right, I'd like to throw it open. You might have questions you want to ask of particular filmmakers, you might want to talk about a theme that's emerged from it, you might have a question for one of the panel, whatever you like. Do you want to go first, John?
No, I just was invited to stand up.
Can we hear John, or do we need to come round? Speak up,
I'll
John.
speak loudly then.
Yeah.
Back to the teacher voice. I used to be a primary school teacher in East London, not far from where the DLR went. It's a privilege to be here, really, and thank you for making those films. Just to follow on from what Ken was saying about organise, I would add organise and make films, because I think what we've seen this morning is the power of the media, especially when allied with tremendous words as well, to really communicate beyond your immediate situation. I live in Lewisham, which recently fought a very successful campaign against plans to close a highly successful hospital down, which was a tremendous achievement, but it was done at least partly by really understanding the power of the moving image and social media and the power that that has to communicate much more widely than your immediate situation. So all of the issues that we face in all of the different settings and all of the different films that have been made this morning, I think organise and make films. It's no surprise that media is currently being downplayed and downgraded inside formal educational structures. But so get out there and organise and make films. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, next question. Down here. Just give the mic a second.
Hi.
Just direct your comments to that.
Right. My name is Frances, and I was 12 when the war ended, so a little bit older than you, but not much. And I've been involved in some sort of community activism since I was 15 or 16, mainly at that time saying, come the revolution, and everything will be better. Things were better, of course. I can remember before the NHS how bad doctoring was, just about. I was carted off when I was 3 or 4 to the fever hospital where my parents weren't allowed to visit me. And when I came out, I couldn't talk. But mostly, although I completely agree with all the remarks that were being made about the importance of working together, I'm also aware that it's never been perfect, that it's much, much worse now, of course, with this feeling that international corporations should rule everything and that greed is the very top quality in our lives. But we've always needed to work together to be a critical friend of the state, because there's always been things that weren't quite right. In the education film, you talked about how now most people can have choices about going to further education and getting words have gone. Sorry, getting trained in one way or another, and that most people did leave school when they were 14 or 15. Most of the people I knew left school somewhere between 14 and 16, and most of the people that I still know what happened to them, they all did part-time education, worked in things that helped give them skills, and many of them ended up doing the kinds of jobs that you can only get now if you've got a degree. But you always needed to work to make things better. At the moment, I'm involved in something that's got a funny name called the National Coalition for Independent Action, but what it's really about is supporting public services, all the things that are absolutely essential like the NHS, like education, like transport, for heaven's sakes, clean water, should be public and should be run by us as a whole community for ourselves, and that voluntary action, that's really voluntary action, not people working as volunteers and being told by paid managers what to do, but people working because they believe in something, and that the independence of that is really important. And I've got some bits of paper about that that I can give to people, because I think that through working together in a voluntary sense is what we can do to change this awful marketisation of the world.
Thank you. That's a good point. Question over here.
At the risk of more older people speaking, I just want to say something about...
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much. About something that happened in 1964 to me, because I'm very worried about the slight nostalgic feeling about the past. I suppose echoing Nikki and Dorothy's film, that sense of when I was at primary school, aged 11, in 1964, a pubescent girl, I, as a joke, said to my teacher, I'm going to go on strike. He said, I believe if you strike with strikers, you should strike back. He hauled me to the front of the class and he bent me over and he slapped me on my bottom. So I want to just make it clear that the relationships between adults and the regimes in these public education systems in the 60s, not the 40s but the 60s, they were very oppressive structures. I went on to grammar school. Luckily for me, amazingly, I passed the 11 plus. What was it? 80% didn't. They went to secondary modern. Because of different things happened to me in my life, I ended up going to a technical college and doing A-levels with most people who'd been to secondary modern, and somehow they had survived the appalling militaristic regime of secondary modern schools, where they often learned very, very little, and they had managed to still want to do education despite all that, and they went to technical college to do A-levels, and the teaching that we got there was often incredibly bad, shockingly bad. And I used to say, God, what's going on here? And they said, this is normal. This is what they had experienced all this time. So all those people who are nostalgic for grammar schools actually usually come from private education. They never went to them. And they certainly didn't go to girls' grammar schools. They went to boys' grammar schools. Because girls' grammar schools were often very oppressive, stupid places, full of hierarchical shit, if I may say so. So I just want to open that up and say one of the great things that we've got now is that we are all here together. We are a younger generation and an older generation. And as Dot so rightly said, it's really important that old people tell about the past and honestly, yes, there was lots of good, but there was also these regimes that we had to fight against as well.
Yes.
And that's really important to say.
That is a good point. And I don't want to speak for the panel or anyone, but I'm sure that no one is wistful about draconian, oppressive, discriminatory regimes as you've spoken about, but at the same time, you know, kind of looking for things that are positive and
well, the positive thing is that we are able to talk to each other in a way, that we've got that intergenerational collaboration.
Does anyone want to respond to that?
Well, I want to use the opportunity to... I've been attending a whole number of meetings recently about the government, what we call the government's gagging bill. Now, over the period of time when privatisation and anti-union laws came together, one was necessary for the other as far as Mrs. Thatcher was concerned. One of the things that happened was that in that space there came campaigns, miners' wives support groups and various other things, and they have continued. So if you look around the country today, you'll find people outside libraries defending them, and all kinds of people just get up and defend. It's still there, so look beyond and you'll find it there. And one of the things about going to these meetings about the gagging bill is this, that a lot of young people who went to university and came out and decided that they didn't want to go to the city and they didn't want to do IT and systems and so on, they didn't want to be in that kind of game, went into things like charities and organisations of that sort, which of course in the distant past were simply organisations that, you know, did what people are doing now, gave food for people who needed it and so on and so forth. There are thousands of charities and millions of people who support them. What has happened is that the political elite, if you like, those in that place, say that they're very worried about this group of people who are in that space. And they've now got a bill which is aimed at cutting down on the possibilities of campaigning during the general election and other elections for the things that they believe in. And a lot of young people who have gone to university and gone into that sort of that sector are now finding themselves in a position where they're having to stand up and defend their right to campaign. And I think it would be a very good thing if, you know, young people who are at school and university sort of made, met up with those young people. They're from across the board. There's somebody there from the people who look after birds, and there's somebody there from 38 Degrees, and there's somebody from Friends of the Earth, and all sorts of people are there. And I think that what we have to say is that within this society there is a fight back, and it doesn't have to be the people who turn you off by sort of saying that you have to believe in this and you have to believe in that. But to find your own way in this, to defend what you believe is right. And I do believe that the film came over as young people believing that there is a thing called, rights and democracy and justice and so on. And we have to stand up for it. I'm in the National Pensioners Convention. We have a campaign called Generations United. And we're absolutely determined to take the National Pensioners Convention into that campaign to unite with young people. So anybody who'd like to know about it, come and see me afterwards.
Now, Ken had a comment about grammar schools, I think.
Yes. I think it's very interesting what you say about grammar schools. I mean, when we were being active in the 60s, we were very clear that the Act, the 44 Butler Act that created free education and secondary modern, secondary technical and grammar schools was actually a piece of class legislation. And its interest was creating a middle class to service industry. So that from the grammar schools would come the accountants and the solicitors and the junior managers. And it was about creating that middle class to service industry and service the interests of industry within society. And it's not accidental. And that was one of the reasons we didn't include it in the film, because it was immensely complicated. The actual act was in 44, not 45. And while the idea of free education for all, of course, is absolutely critical, the way it was realised was really complicated, apart from the beatings, which were obviously a hangover from decades and centuries, and not specifically the 1940s. I mean, that was just a hangover that gradually disappeared, thank goodness. But the actual act, the Butler Act, that created that three-tier system in which between 70 and 80% of people failed aged 11 and would never go to university because of that, that was a very carefully judged piece of class legislation. But the other thing I wanted to say, but two things quickly, is that if you do make films and you do become professional, for God's sake join the union. An awful lot of people in films now do not and don't even know the union exists. It's called BECTU. It will protect your interests. You shouldn't work without it. If you want to know how to do, well, just look it up online, BECTU. The other thing quickly, speaking of the spirit of the age, it's important that we understand why the spirit of the age is as it is. And it is about the dominance of the big corporations, and they are voracious. And only in the last few weeks, we've had the Royal Mail is now privatised, sold off. People have cleaned up financially. privately. And there are now more things, even this week, are going to be sold off. We know that in the NHS, where Jonathon works in the NHS, Richard Branson has to make a profit before we can give our children our care in places like Devon. I'm sure there are other equally horrendous examples. But big corporations have to expand. They have to find the cheapest labour. They have to find the cheapest raw materials. They have to pursue the biggest market share they can. If they don't, their shareholders will complain and their resources will drain away. So this is in the nature of the beast. And the spirit of this age, which is the dominance of those corporations, is not an accident. It's not because the people who run them are necessarily bad people, though they probably are. It's because that is the system they operate. And if you want to change that spirit of this age, which is destroying the planet and destroying your futures, you have to organize politically and you have to understand the nature of the beast you're against. Because simply wishing it to happen, wishing it to change won't happen. Simply doing odd bits of good work won't happen, because they love that. That's their big society. That's people working for free to pick up the mess that they've made. They love that. You've actually got to understand the enemy and organize to defeat it. It's a big intellectual challenge.
That would be a fantastic note to finish on, but I'm aware that I've promised
Yes,
Nikki
yes.
one very short question, and then Mel and Will from Havant are just going to tell us in 30 seconds, if you can, about your project. So if you can be really quick, Nikki, then Mel and Will, and then I must hand over to Julian because we're running out of time.
Yeah, it's not a question, but it's just following on from both of those anyway. Yeah, kind of an optimistic note that I think the spirit of 13, yes, it's greed, and Boris Johnson said that greed is good, and David Cameron, when Thatcher died, said we're all Thatcherites now, and that was like everyone was just like, oh, what? But we've got to also remember that 2013 came after 2012 when there were riots, when there was Occupy, and at the moment there's all of these student protests, and I think one of the biggest risks is not defending that right to protest. And you were talking about gagging orders, and I know that recently there have been occupations at Sussex University and stuff, and I think 5 students have been suspended. And if they're actually silencing people for peacefully protesting, then maybe we can make the spirit of 13 at least fighting for the right to protest. Because I think there is a lot of protests going on. People are standing up for what they believe in. So yeah, maybe that could
That would
be
have also been a fantastic note to finish on, but I promised these people they could tell us about their project, so thank you very much. Would you like to just briefly tell us about your, there in the sort of penultimate row from the back, how that just, we were thinking about, you know, where might we go from here, and Julian will say a bit more about that at the end, but your project just seemed to encapsulate something that might go forward in terms of intergenerational dialogue.
A documentary on the Havant War Memorial, so we're from Havant area.
Yeah.
And it's to research all of the names on the Havant War Memorial and trace back all their stories, interview family members who are still living today, and try and, with a bit of reenactment, kind of
and essentially
paint a kind of picture.
Looking into their lives and the lives of the families and the communities as well. We're currently looking at kind of the life of one family, the Paxton, is it Paxton family. And it's really interesting, the wife, the mother, it was heavily involved in nursing, and she had letters written from soldiers thanking her for her nursing and offering opportunities, and that is real community sense. And relating it to modern day, where the families, do they know of their history, and kind of teaching them and looking at that sort of sense from this war memorial. Looking at the names and looking at the people that are on the memorial and the people that perhaps should have been on the memorial. And yeah, that's essentially our project.
And drawing out that theme of community as a crucial strand that I think has emerged very strongly today. I'm really sorry that I feel like I need to wind it up so that Julian can close the event, but thank you very much indeed to the panellists, and thank you very much indeed for your contributions. And Julian, would you like to close the proceedings?
Just to reinforce again, as I said at the start, thank you so much everyone for coming along this Friday to London for this event. This was a quite difficult project to run in the sense that we did it with very little funding, as in none really. And although we've said a lot of things about education today, and we've talked about perhaps the lack of spaces in the curriculum for this kind of work, I believe, and endorse what John said, that education, schools, colleges, universities, does offer at least a context where we can reach out to younger people to organise in various ways. And we found some of the projects we've done, the filmmaking is one way of kind of mobilising that. So my dream would be next year for the Spirit of 14 to try and get into every school in the country somehow, find ways of making those things, because I'm sure what we'd all agree from today is that there is a desire for young people to organise, to find ways of mobilising with collective action. It's just that it's often difficult for the younger generation to find the spaces and places to do that. So, if when we put up the film discussion from today on our website and disseminate it broadly, if you can spread the word, if you can pass that on, and if you can find a way of raising consciousness about the project to anyone who might have some funding to help us do this on a larger scale, we'd be really grateful. But just to say thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, 16 Films. Thank you very much, Ken and Rebecca. Dot. Jonathon, sorry for the endless mistakes, like the name and age and everything else. To Dorothy on the panel as well. Thanks to Mark for chairing, and enjoy your weekend. Thank you.